In this video, I share 4 weird opinions that I have about wargaming, why I have them, and why you might have them as well. I keep a big list of video topics on my phone, so if I ever have an actual good idea, I can put it in there immediately. My memory has always been pretty lousy, so if I don't type it into my phone right away, I'll lose that idea. I generally go through that list when it's time to start figuring out a new video for the week, and I was doing that recently when I noticed that kind of a bunch of those ideas, I guess you would call them, they weren't really a whole video's worth, probably, right? But they all had one thing in common. They were all perhaps a bit controversial. I've never meant for the ideas that I talk about on this channel to be controversial for the sake of being controversial. But, if you love a hobby like I love tabletop wargaming and the miniatures hobby, then you have a tendency to think about it a lot, like when you're driving somewhere or you're taking a shower or you're, whatever. You think about the things that you like and the things that you don't, and then you kind of think about why you like the things that you do, and you gain opinions and stuff. And sometimes your ideas and opinions fall in line with most of the rest of the fans of the hobby, and sometimes your opinions are weird. And that's, okay. Reasonable people can have differing opinions about wargaming. It's just a game. So I'm going to run through these kind of 4 ideas, these 4 opinions of mine about wargaming. And as it turns out, you may or may not agree. I feel like there may be a little bit more disagreement than agreement, but I'm also frequently wrong about stuff like that. The idea is to make you, the viewer, think more about your hobby opinions and why you have those opinions. Sometimes we hold opinions that we get from others, and we just assume that, well, we must feel the same way. But upon actually sitting and thinking about it, really thinking, we might find that we actually believe differently. Okay, first one. A miniatures wargame that's played on a hex map or a grid map with no actual 3D terrain is actually a board game, or maybe a gateway game at best. I've talked about gateway games in the past, pachow, and they're basically games that help bring kind of board gamers into wargaming, right? Kind of a bridge between, if you will. I used to see Warhammer Underworlds as a pretty good gateway game, or Zombicide was also a pretty good one as well. Both had minis, but they also had like hexes or grids, and there was no 3D terrain and all that kind of stuff. For me, 3D terrain is kind of important. I think I probably really first noticed this at Gen Con years and years ago with Battletech. I'd stand over there by the Catalyst kind of, gaming area in the gamer hall and watch people playing big games of the, venerable mech property. And they'd just have a bunch of mechs on this huge hex board. And there wouldn't be anything else on there, right? Sure, the hills and the elevation and the forests and stuff like that would be marked on the board, but it was still just actually flat. This is why I prefer Alpha Strike from Battletech. There's no hex map if you don't want to. You can play it with a hex map if you want to. And it's also designed for 3D terrain. The starter box even comes with cardboard buildings and trees. Is it just a case of semantics? Perhaps. But for me, the better the terrain and the board, the better the immersion. And tabletop wargaming is all about immersion and how things look, in my mind. The game rules are important as well, but without the craft of it, hills, trees, ruins, scatter terrain, and all that kind of stuff, then it's just kind of a game on a board. To me, a board game, right? And I've never really been into board games. My wife and our friends will tell you. Here's another opinion. Robust lore isn't needed for a miniatures game. As it turns out, nearly no lore is actually needed for a miniatures wargame. Case in point, one of my favorite wargames is Space Weirdos. It has no lore except for the name. space weirdos. This implies that like the game is sci-fi based because, space, and you come up with whatever kind of ragtag group of weirdos that you want. Also, I think that the excellent cover art does kind of some heavy lifting for the lore to a degree, but you get to make up whatever headcanon you'd like, and that's better than lore as far as I'm concerned. Now, can lore sell a game? Absolutely, of course. Compelling lore is one of the main reasons that Warhammer games continue to do as well as they do. Many, many people love the lore, and it keeps them buying and playing the game. And if they don't play the tabletop game, then they might play the video games that are licensed out to different companies and all that kind of stuff. And if people don't play those, they probably read the books, which are published through Black Library, also owned, by Warhammer. And then they talk about them online, and then they make memes, and then they cosplay, and like all that kind of stuff. It's an incredibly effective marketing tool, but it's not a requirement. And frankly, it doesn't really work for smaller indie games. I find that if a small indie skirmish game has like 20 or 30 pages of lore at the beginning of the book, I find myself wondering if maybe the person creating it would have been better served to just write a novel instead of trying to design a game, right? Like, personally, with small miniatures agnostic games, I would rather come up with the lore for my small gang in my head. I don't want to be fenced in with the lore. If I want to enjoy a cool story, then I guess I'd just rather read a book or watch a movie. Here's another one. There should be 2 versions of Warhammer 40K and 2 versions of Age of Sigmar. For each game, there should be a version for tournament play, and then there should also be a version that's fun. Gentle ribbing aside, I understand that there's narrative play and there's match play already available in both games, and that those 2 versions are kind of what I'm talking about here, sort of. However, they're generally the same rule set, and more so, they're usually perceived as the same rule set, so the more narrative-style players get kind of lumped in with the tournament folk. I did a video last week about some of the things that are driving people away from wargaming. Pachow. And one of these main things that people cited in the comments over and over again was the constant rules changes for 40K and Age of Sigmar. Ostensibly, the rules changes are to sort of try and kind of balance the game, and the tournament scene is where that data comes from, watching the stats and the wins and losses of dozens, if not hundreds, of tournaments each weekend all across the globe. And the tournament scene is generally where the desire for more balance comes from as well. But if the narrative version of the rules was considerably simpler, fewer tactics cards, fewer stratagems, no rules changes every 3 months. I mean, they come out with a new version of the rules every 3 years. That should probably be good enough for most narrative players, right? Then, all of that might help to keep more people in the Warhammer ecosystem, if that's what they're looking for, which it is. Tournament mode for the hardcore, with all the updates and the balancing and the stuff that we see now, and then also a more chill version with fewer rules and no big changes until next edition for the other folks. Plus, they could sell more books. Lord knows that they'd love that, right? In my opinion, the narrative versions should also fully be available free online, not just like the core rules portion of the book, but the whole shoot and match, so that narrative people who, love hard copy versions of the books can still buy a fancy book, but other folks who prefer free digital rules will still get in there as well and get access to everything, right? To many people that are more interested in narrative style play, the constant search for balance doesn't really make for a fun game rule set. Feeling comfortable with stable rules and enjoying themselves is what they want. Lastly, I'll leave you with this. Round bases are better looking than square bases. But integrated bases, those weirdly shaped bits of ground between the minis' feet, usually on some companies' metal miniatures, but sometimes they're also on resin ones and even plastic as well. Those are the worst. Those are absolutely by far the worst. They're technically there to help the miniature stand up without the need for a round or a square base. but they're kind of generally pretty thin, and then the Mini has a tendency to either tip forwards or tip backwards, right? The integrated base is starting to become a bit of an endangered species, thankfully, and that's actually a good thing in my mind. The worst part of the integrated bases comes from when you want to put the model on an actual useful round base, or, square base, I guess, if that's what you're into, because then you either need to cut away the weird terrain snowboard that they're standing on, and that can be really a pain if the model is metal, or you have to put a lot of basing texture over the integrated base to sort of hide it, and then your model kind of looks like it's standing on a tiny burial mound. Maybe like something, for sentient mice or giant ants. I'm not sure. Neither way is good. So for good or for ill, those are my 4 weird opinions about wargaming. You might agree with me, which might make you a bit weird too. It's okay. Or maybe you haven't really thought about it, and now that you're thinking about it, you agree with me, or perhaps you disagree. Either way, the point is to make you think. Think about what you actually like and dislike in wargaming, and maybe that'll help you to focus more on the things you enjoy and less on the things that you don't. If you really think about things, and not just kind of agree with people, like me online or people at the shop, you win. So what do you think about my weird wargaming opinions? Do you agree? Disagree? Do you actually like those integrated bases? It's very strange. Anyway, let us all know down in the comments below, and drop your own weird wargaming ideas down there as well. Opinions you've got about wargaming that you think, other people don't think this way, and I'm going to try to explain my point of view. On your way down there, of course, show your opinion about this video via the depressmentation of the like button. It helps the video and the channel to reach more people and to hopefully create more wargamers. If you'd like to see more videos from this channel every single week, then hit the subscribe button down there as well. It's free. Thanks for watching.